Okay, um, today we're working on skills that you will put into practice for the separate piece essay that we'll start developing on Monday, and a rough draft of that is due on Friday of next week. So you'll have a few days to write that. More details on that later. If you want to get a head start on it, you could probably do that over the weekend if you were so inclined. The assignment is available on the website. You can check that out at your leisure. But today I'd like to talk to you about specific sentence writing of claims that you will apply to this essay. Let's start with what we've done before, writing claims for extended writing responses. How do you do it? And? Restate and what? So, taking one of our QAR prompts for an example, if I say, explain how Finney is an exceptional teenager, what is your first sentence response? Josiah. Yeah, please. Finney's an exceptional teenager. Good enough. Because he displays truth and honesty in all things that he does. Sounds good. Both tasks satisfied. Josiah restated and answered. Now, if you have this, if you've mastered it, you know how simple it is. It's just a formula. All you need to do, especially when you're trying to survive in a class like this, is pay attention to the content and then frame it. What do I mean by that? Pay attention to the lessons, what we talked about, the little group QAR activities, figure out, oh, wait a minute, he's honest. And then frame it in the question there. Framing in the question means restate and then your answer is whatever we've discussed in lecture. Simple. But this is only limited in its use. So you can use this. Where would you find these sorts of writings most often? Besides the QAR kind of thing, where would you see this type of writing most often? No, not so much essays, actually. Where would you most likely be doing some short writing? Not just English class. I would hope that you would do it in social studies and other sorts of places too. Tests. Tests. Oh yeah, OGTs. You're most likely doing that. Why? Because those people are usually testing you on comprehension. It's whether or not you understand something. Just comprehension. It's a fairly low-level thinking activity. Now, I give you these as out-of-class writing assignments because I want you to develop some other skills as well. I want you to develop skills of integrating evidence, quotations, non-quotations, writing paragraphs that link, no extraneous material, and so on. So I'm assessing a number of different qualities. But basically, they're asking you if you understand. Do you understand the characterization of Finney? Geez, how many more people are coming into the class? Okay.
Well, I think we've got everybody now.
I think now, yeah.
Big bio test today, sorry.
Basic comprehension, that's all. So we need to look at something a little bit more advanced. Something that requires a little bit more brain power, a little bit more creativity. Uh-huh. More. That is analysis. Now this is still, I'm going to give you a method that's pretty formulaic, easy to repeat and easy to use, easy to write sentences with. However, you got to realize that psychologists believe analytical functions in your brain are a little bit more highly developed than comprehension. Comprehension means that I tell you something and you say, yes, I understand. That's about it. Analysis is something different. Somebody care to give me a definition? What do you understand analysis to be? We throw this word around a lot. Daniel.
It's like evidence that supports your claim or idea.
Okay, that is true. So evidence that supports a claim or idea. However, I can do that with synthesis as well, and I can do that with the basic comprehension stuff. So you're correct. In analysis, I would use the evidence, but it's not unique to analysis.
Like analogy?
No, that's different.
What the heck? I just said I had lots of them. But like a bunch of little pieces that build up. I know what I'm trying to say.
You're getting closer when you're talking about pieces. Let's see if Josiah's got it. Not quite. Yeah, analysis is to analyze, and all you've done is transform the word from noun into verb. But let's start with where Josiah was correct. We want to understand a thing. I use the word thing intentionally because I want to be broad, general, and vague. You want to understand a thing. How? What's the method? How are you understanding it? That's true. But what does that mean? You're understanding a thing, you're analyzing. Huh? Yes, but
Collecting pieces and putting them together.
actually that's synthesis. When you collect pieces and put them together, it's synthesis.
Can you separate like that?
Whatever the big thing into smaller simple.
There you go. How do anatomists understand the human body?
Oh, by like breaking into like bones and muscular.
Skeletal system, muscular system. Which other systems, Robbie? What other systems do we have? Muscular, skeletal.
Is nervous.
Yep. Nervous system. Respiratory system. Excellent. And so I might understand the human body only by looking at the nervous system. And if I were a neurologist, that's what I'd do. I understand a thing just by looking at a part of it. Looking at a part, taking apart the pieces. And when Shelby was talking about putting those pieces together, that's synthesis. That's the next level up. Right now, analysis, we're talking about breaking it apart into pieces. So we're not in a biology class nor an anatomy class. We're not breaking down a body. What are we breaking down? Books, literature. And what parts does literature, a single book, contain? Can you name some of the parts? You just name some of the systems of the body. Can you name parts of a book? Oh, that's true. So, and we'll talk about that when we talk about Friday Night Lights, which is an aspect of what? Oh, and now you're giving me an analytical concept for the plot, right? So the plot can be divided into different parts, can't it? And the plot is one system of a novel, if you will. And it has different parts. What's the first part of a plot? Exposition. Then we go to? The conflict is introduced in what part? Initial incident. Exposition, initial incident, rising action, climax, resolution / denouement, however you want to term the end of it. What drives that entire thing? What's the power of it? The conflict. Thank you. The conflict provides the energy of the plot. It's what drives the plot along. That's what have I not talked about? No, I mean I know, but in looking at the plot, what have I ignored that is also in a book? Characters. What else? Jake, you have something else I've ignored? What else have I ignored besides characters and looking at plot? Setting. Setting. Okay. What other aspects of literature, what other structural aspects of literature may I have ignored? Oh, the narrative perspective. Absolutely. These are the analytical concepts of literature. And by analytical, I mean when I'm looking at one, I'm only looking at a piece of it. You've been engaging in analysis several times over throughout this class. But now we're just kind of taking a look at what you've done. You did it primarily through the short fiction unit. I would introduce you to an analytical concept or remind you of it, like conflict or characterization or narrative perspective. And then I would ask you to use it to understand that thing. You were working with analysis. So it's examining the way a part of a greater system functions. We're only looking at a piece. If you tried to understand an entire system all at once without taking it apart, it would overwhelm you. If you tried to understand the human body completely just at one go, it's too much. So you take it apart. Same thing happens with literature. The good analyst knows what he or she is talking about and does not talk about anything else and focuses on that part only. Kind of like putting blinders on. You're only looking at that one thing. The good literary analysis claim focuses us on that one thing. So today we'll talk about how to write literary analysis claims. You've written extended writing claims, and those are basically, hey, respond to my question. Now, literary analysis claim is something a little bit different, but it's also pretty easy. And this one doesn't just respond to a prompt. It tells me how an author is doing something with a particular part of literature, a particular literary device. It takes a look at one thing that the author is doing. That's it. And it focuses us on that. I'm going to emphasize this again because I know I've said it twice already. I will say it a third time. Focus. You guys are doing really well in this class. I like your writing. So you're not really suffering from this, but I've seen a lot of high school writers, especially at the freshman level, who lack focus. They drift from one topic to the next topic, and they're kind of related, and you can see the chain of thought, but by the time you get from step 1 to step 5, they're totally off track. A good literary analysis claim will focus you on one and only one analytical concept, which is good, because that means you are only dealing with one aspect of the novel. You don't have to worry about all of it. It should help you. Here's the framework. 4 pieces of information. Shelby gave us the 2-part structure for an extended writing claim. Now you got 4 pieces. But don't worry, it's not really much more complex. I want the author's name, I want the title of the work, and remember that could be a chapter, or that could be a poem, or that could be a magazine article, or that could be a novel, or that could be a short story, or that could be a play. The literary device, and the effect of its usage. Tell you what, I'll give you one piece of information. Let's see how you can fill in the rest. You want to deal with Fahrenheit? Remember, you don't have to. You did read The Pedestrian. But we will work on Fahrenheit 451. What do you want to say about it? What literary device do you want to focus on that Bradbury uses? Fire? And what are we saying that fire is? What kind of literary device? Symbol. What's the effect? What's he using it to do? Jasmine? No. Montag is. What's Bradbury using it to do? We're talking about the author. Josiah. Okay, but what does fire represent? He's not trying to say something about fire. He's trying to say something about something else. We talked about this a little bit. What kind of power? Whose power? More general. You're on the right track. Human power. Is human power destructive? Is it creative? It's both, absolutely. Does fire do both? Yeah. So there we go. That's all you need. Can somebody take these 4 pieces of information and tell me what the sentence sounds like? Connor?
In Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury uses fire to symbolize human power.
Good. Works for me. In Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury uses fire to symbolize human power. To explore human power, either one would be fine. And I'll talk about power verbs in a moment. But that works. Now let's talk a little bit about how this works. Give me a moment. I'll type it up here. Type what Connor's got. All right, let's talk about what I like. And remember, what I want to do on your essays, I just want to go through them really quickly and say yes, 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 perfect, 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 full points. I don't want to have to stop and say, wait a minute, there's something missing. This is strange. So just learn the formula and just repeat the formula. And those of you who feel, oh man, formula, it's just so restricting and uncreative, I know, I understand. But once you master this formula, then you can start playing with it and you can start experimenting. And certainly I see students who master this formula, get the basics down, and then they start experimenting and playing with it. So, let's talk about it. Begin with your title. Start with your title of the work, put it in a prepositional phrase. That'll make everything easy, and don't forget to italicize it. What must you do with that prepositional phrase also? What do you see up there? Comma. Thank you. The comma rule. Introductory prepositional phrase. We see the comma. So say in Fahrenheit 451, in a separate piece, in the pedestrian, in two kinds, whatever you want to do. Quotation marks, italics, make sure that you're formatting it properly, and it works. Follow that immediately with the author's name. Why do I use the author's name? Because it gives me a really powerful subject. I don't use an empty pronoun like it. I say Ray Bradbury. In Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury. And then throw the literary device and the effect. Could you flip that around? Ray Bradbury, it symbolizes human power through the fire? Sure. Doesn't matter. But this is an easy way to do it. Try to use power verbs whenever you can. Symbolize. What would be synonymous with symbolize? Represents. What other verbs do you hear me using often when I'm talking about literature? Portray. What else? Define? Yeah, it's a little bit limited, but I can see somebody defining something. What else? Develop. I love develop. Anything else? I like explore too. I like discuss, although in literature, authors don't often directly discuss something. They usually do it through symbolism and representation. They do it indirectly. But use your power verbs. That poster up there above Jake, over to my left, has always given you, and I know it's kind of small for some of you further away, but that shows you some verbs that you might use in standard literary analysis. Use those verbs. Avoid get, have, and is. Let's do this, tell you what, one more time. Before we move on to something else. Create a new framework here. Do we have another piece of literature you'd like to work with besides a separate piece? The pedestrian? You want to do Bradbury and the pedestrian again? Okay, got it. All right. Bradbury. Pedestrian. Remember quotation marks because it is a short story. What do you want to deal with? It's not a literary device. But what do you want to... Person versus society? Do you want to talk about social conflict? Okay. Now, is that going to be the effect or is that going to be the device? Let's say it's the device. I prefer to say social conflict over person versus society conflict. It's simpler. I prefer to say personal conflict over person versus person. I prefer to say environmental conflict over person versus nature, whatever. But that's what we talked about. What's he using that social conflict to do? Okay, he's developing a theme, right? I like it. The ideas are good. Who can come up with a sentence? Jasmine.
In the pedestrian, Ray Bradbury uses social conflict to explore the theme of loss of individuality.
Nice. Very nice. See how easy it is? That's how easy it is. And I hope you heard what you just said, because everything you said sounded really sophisticated and advanced. No, it's perfect. It's exact. The only thing I would change with yours, Jasmine, is I would take out theme of, because it's just a little bit redundant. It's like I would say exactly what you said. Here's how I would change it. In the pedestrian, Ray Bradbury uses social conflict to explore the loss of individuality. Does that sentence seem to be true, considering what you read? And it's precise, because all I'm doing is looking at the conflict's relationship to the theme. That's analysis. That's a part of the whole. What am I ignoring? What else did we talk about with the pedestrian that I am ignoring? We talked about the character, right? Do you remember Leonard Mead? What character type was he? He was static and flat. Very good. Static flat. See, your memories are excellent. He's static flat. I didn't talk about characterization. I don't need to talk about characterization. I didn't talk about the setting, even though I could talk about how the metaphors and similes develop a specific mood in the setting. That's an easy analytical task. But I didn't talk about it. I could talk about the narrative perspective. Anybody remember what the narrative perspective was in the pedestrian? First, second, third. Jeez. Sounds like we're commenting on a baseball game. What? Second is you. Do you remember his name? Do you know why you remember his name? Because it was third limited. We kept talking about him in the third person. Do you remember that little trick? If you remember a character's name really well, chances are really good that it's third person because they didn't use the I. Because the author, Bradbury, used his name, Leonard Mead. It was third limited.
So what would you call the separate theme? Because I remember James name really good.
Because a lot of other people talk to him that way.
Oh, yeah.
In the pedestrian, nobody really talks to Mead all that much, except the conversation in the end. So you don't have a lot of opportunity to hear his name, but still you hear it a lot because Bradbury uses it. But you're right. In a separate piece, a lot of people talk to Gene. There's a lot of dialogue because it's a novel. So you remember his name quite well, even though it's third limited. I'm sorry, first person. Even though it's first person, because you hear the dialogue constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that little trick and shortcut, Shelby, won't work at all times, but sometimes it's a helpful guide. Yeah.
Have you ever found a book where it's in first person, but the narrator refers to himself in third person?
First person, but the narrator refers to himself in the third person. Probably. Every trick's been tried. But I'm just wondering, yeah, I guess you could distinguish it. You'll read in high school plenty of books in which the narrators are incompetent in some way. Next year you'll have the opportunity to read, Lord of the Flies is a sophomore book. I trade them out. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, probably one of your best examples, where the narrator is a paranoid schizophrenic who is on drugs, on medication in a mental hospital. So every once in a while he has hallucinations because of the drugs. The narrator of the novel, the speaker, the first person speaker. He's mentally ill. So you could take a narrator like that and make him talk about himself in the third person. Sure.
Just like occasionally people do that, right? Sometimes you get a friend who said, hey, Connor did this. He referring to himself, careers.
Yeah, like egotistical athletes like to do.
Exactly.
You're only ever allowed to do that as a joke. If you ever refer to yourself in third person seriously because you're that egotistical, you must leave. By the way, that rule goes to me, for me too. If I start talking, hey, Clarkson don't like that, then I'm done. Connor does what he wants, Mr. Clarkson. You can't stop Connor. Connor is the power. No. The Connor. The Connor. You respect the Connor. No. Okay, back on track. Yes, we are. We are, of course. Always record the good ones. This is another claim, an example of a claim from Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, and you can see its parts. So who's the author? What's the title of the work? What's the device? And what's the effect? Here's another comment that I want to make about this. I want you to pay attention to this as well. Some writers will say, in To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee uses imagery to develop mood. What's the problem? Yeah, not focus. Doesn't tell me what I'm talking about. Remember what I've said before. I want focus. And focus means you must specify. Imagery of what? Of the courtroom. Because if you're talking about imagery overall, how much imagery do you think there is in that novel? A lot. You're going to write an essay about all the imagery in that novel? No, you're not. It would take me a long time to do that. I would have to sit down for hours upon hours pouring through that novel to talk about all the imagery in the novel. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'll look at a select number of pages that develop imagery of one specific setting at one plot event, the courtroom. That's focus. And then I label what my mood is. It'll help me out. And I'll show you how it'll help me out in a little bit when we start talking about a separate piece. Last note before we start experimenting with that. The effect is most important. The rest of it is just a series of tools. The effect is what you're looking at. In The Pedestrian, Ray Bradbury has a purpose. And as all good fiction writers, part of his purpose is just to entertain you, and hopefully it's an entertaining story. But what's his sort of philosophical purpose? Why did he write that story?
Allow you to understand how people are both good and bad.
People are both good and bad? We only have one person. So we can't really have all... I'm sorry? Yeah, talk about human society. Shelby, what were you going to say?
I was thinking like to develop some sort of understanding of the war and how it
No.
affects-
Pedestrian.
I thought
You're
it
right
was
on.
separate.
No, that's okay. You're correct for a separate piece. Oh, I'm sorry. I was talking about The Pedestrian. That's right. We're all talking about different novels. I'm sorry. I'm bouncing around from literature to literature. Jake?
I was going to say, like, it represents that how society's losing its individuality.
Yeah. He's upset because he thinks society's becoming a bunch of mindless zombies, and he wants to warn people. That's his purpose. That's here in the effect. The important part and the interesting part of your claim. This is just a tool. Social conflict. The effect is interesting. Loss of individuality. I don't care if you like Ray Bradbury. I don't care if you dislike him. I don't care if you like science fiction or you dislike science fiction. Chances are, especially you as a teenager, are concerned with your own individuality, your own self-expression, your own ability to make up rules and follow them or not follow them based upon your own freedom of choice. You're concerned that society will tell you what to do and not care what you think. Everybody's concerned with that, teenagers most especially. That's an interesting part of the story, and that's where the interest of your claim usually lies. It's in the effect.
Was this written, or was The Pedestrian written around the time of the Red Scare?
I don't... Oh, it's a good question. I think it was 50s when he wrote The Pedestrian. I can't remember the copyright date on that. But I do believe it was 50, so it would be contemporary of that in some respect. I don't know, Jake, exactly where it lies in relation to that. I do know that Bradbury was not so much concerned with the Red Scare as he was concerned with himself being personally hassled, because he tells a story about he was walking around his home on the street in California, Southern California, when cops stopped him for this very same reason and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm walking." "Well, you're suspicious." "I'm just walking." You know, he's walking just for the enjoyment of it. So it's kind of autobiographical.
What's the Red Scare?
The Red Scare was when, and you'll learn about this in American history, when certain portions of Congress, the House of Representatives, decided to mount an inquiry into which members of the U.S. Population were communists. And they didn't necessarily have the power to stop them from being communists because we have freedom of political association in this country, but they could certainly embarrass them and land them on blacklists so they would lose their jobs and they'd be shunned by society. It was what's considered to be a modern day witch hunt, a way of
Way overboard.
yeah, totally.
Accusing everyone of that.
Yep. Yeah, and it made people lie and rat out others and say, hey, I know a whole bunch of communists. If you let me go, I'll give you their names. Big mess. A separate piece. Can we come up with some claims for a separate piece based upon our allegory and symbol discussion over the last couple days?
Not your head, yeah.
Yes. Okay, let's come up with one. I've been hearing music all day. I'm glad that you're hearing it too, so at least if we're insane, we've got company. Yeah?
And a separate priest knows uses allegory to describe how he must mature.
We're on the right track. I want to make some changes. Talk to me first about what Josiah is doing correct. Title and then author. Works nicely. I like the way it begins. Good, good. Jasmine? He's got a lit device. What else? The effect seems to be having something to do with the theme. So everything seems to be in the right place. Good. In other words, Josiah overall is following my directions and doing this well. However, I will state that it lacks a little bit of focus. It's not specific enough.
Would it not be you? Would it be like?
Good point, Jake. This is a correction on a Muggs issue. Remember, that's a voice problem. Do not use you.
I mean, stop saying you're mature. I really looks like adapt.
Okay, but I think adapt to mature, those work sort of synonymously. So I'm okay with that.
He also gives a specific example of the allegory.
So what do you mean? What specific example of the allegory would you like?
I don't know, like, how in Fahrenheit 451 we set the fire, and specifically for Phil Mockingbird, the courtroom scene, like, he doesn't do that with this one.
That's true. So he doesn't really have a specific device. And here, if Tori or Sarah, you have this, just hold on one second. What is allegory? Could-
Without character, not a concrete object.
Character represents an idea, right?
Oh, Phineas Johnson.
Doesn't he have a device and an effect and an effect? What is inherent in allegory? When I say allegory, what do I mean? A character representing an idea, right? So your claim is actually a little bit more complex than you thought. You have allegory and you have a secondary effect after allegory. That's a lot of material. So what I'd like to do here is take what's right here and make that your claim. Jake?
Okay, Knowles uses face death to describe how you must mature and survive.
I don't even think you need Finney's death. Although you could say, yeah, okay, uses Finney's death to emphasize the necessity of adaptation or to emphasize the necessity of maturing, something like that. Okay, I could go with that. However, I think that's a little bit of a drift from Josiah's allegory point. But I like your claim. Shelby.
Mine was going along with Jake's, but I was kind of just based on allegory, so I would
Well, let's stay on allegory. Come on, folks. It's right up there. The framework's right there in front of you. Tori. There you go. Finney. To represent childhood. Perfect. Do you see, Josiah, how you had that packed in here? And you had Jean representing adulthood packed in here? By saying allegory, you have said so much. You can't just throw the word allegory out there because it's huge. It's like saying, hey, he uses symbolism to create interest. Symbolism of what? What are you talking about? There's just too much there. So we're unpacking it. And now we have a claim that says, in a separate piece, Knowles uses Finney to represent childhood. We double it. We throw Jean in there too. Jean and Finney represent. Let's. Hold on. You're once again jumping to the theme. All of you want to jump to the theme.
In a separate piece, Knowles uses Finney to represent Jean's childhood.
Okay, Finney to represent Jean's childhood. That's. I see where you're adding it, and that could work. Here's where I was going. Just that. Finney and Jean to represent childhood and adulthood. That's it. Yeah, you could throw it to represent Jean's childhood. That would be specific. Mastering the basic four-part format of writing a literary analysis claim is pretty simple. Chances are really good that if you're a good student and you listen to everything I said and you just make sure to keep your notes around, that you have just mastered the four-part technique. It's not that difficult. Refining it takes practice, and it takes just repeated use. So we will use this format not only for the separate piece essay, but we'll use this format for everything that we do with Friday Night Lights. And by the end of that unit, you should have this down and fine-tuning it, because you can see that Josiah was obeying all of the procedures that I just taught him, and yet he ran into a little problem. He packed too much into it. And that's fine. You make a mistake, you move on, you write the next one, you fine-tune it, and pretty soon you get the technique and you get the hang of it. And that's that. Questions? All clear? Yay.